joining the follow-up call from webinar number 2, Early Psychosis Intervention for Teens and Young Adults. I think our title of that one was From Process to Recovery. Yeah, we have some options today. The first thing I would like to check with all the participants is, how did the homework go? And did anybody do the homework? And if you didn't do the homework, I get to call you non-compliant and close you from services. So I'll start there to see if anybody completed the homework and if they had any thoughts on the video that I asked to watch, that I asked you all to watch.
He's checking in with all of us about our homework. This is only one way, right?
Yeah, homework is hard. Even the term homework in some ways implies this kind of tension word, or it has bad associations because we feared homework in high school. Sometimes I remind even our clinicians to maybe avoid the term homework when working with our participants because of those potential implications, and maybe use the term practice or something like that. So guessing that nobody completed that or had comments, and that's okay. That just means I need to continue to engage you in the practice. Adam can go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint slide that listed the homework.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Oh, no, I mean, I don't know.
People are like, oh, now there it is.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, just a question.
So if you haven't, one thing that I also train clinicians on is that when a participant doesn't complete their homework, one thing to do is just do it right in session. So, if you are on Facebook, take a moment and kind of follow us on Facebook, read some of the materials we have, and feel free to make a comment. I won't have you watch the video now, but I do encourage you to watch this video on YouTube and think about the main character in this video, or the main participant in this video. And although he wasn't exactly skilled at what he did, he was very effective. And I think that actually parallels the work that we do in early psychosis programs, is that we don't always need to be particularly skilled, but there's a way to be effective, and sometimes that effectiveness is just kind of engaging and meeting the client where they're at. This video is kind of a demonstration of that. So I encourage you to watch that when you get an opportunity and talk about it with your team. Right now, I guess I'd like to open it up to anybody on the call who has any questions from the webinar. It's your time, so happy to answer those questions. Oh, and I should say also on the line we have Tamara Sale, who's our kind of the director for the ESA Center for Excellence, who can answer questions about system infrastructure, startup questions, things like that. And we also have Dr. Neil Falk, who's a psychiatrist with our largest early psychosis program in Oregon, so he could also address any medical or prescribing questions that participants may have. So with that, I open it up for some questions. I think you can either type or speak. Or perhaps I was so clear on my webinar that there weren't any follow-up questions, which is also fine. Another option we can do with this time is to cover some of the areas that I did not have a chance to cover in the first webinar if people would be interested in that. And so again, your time, just let me know. I want to make sure you get your needs met. All right, it looks like a couple of questions have come in. One from Jen Walker. The question is, for the ESA programs, what percentages of service do you find are provided in the community home versus the office? And thank you for asking approximate, because that would be where my answer would fall. I think when we first started, my anecdotal experience and recollection says we were spending a good percentage of the time in the homes, maybe up to 60, 70%, or in the field. It may not, or in the community. I think from what the clinicians around the state report, they report that those who are probably in that first episode area, the engagement tends to be in a place that the client feels comfortable, and that might be in their home, that might be in the community. And in some cases, you're engaging in the home because the individual is just not at all interested in going to a community mental health center. So that's, I think with that particular group, you spend more time engaging in the community or the home. But we have been finding, as we've gotten a little bit younger and integrating some of the at-risk individuals, the at-risk for psychosis individuals into our programs, more and more of that group is coming to the office. Potentially because maybe their parents are dragging them in, or they're not quite as, they don't carry the stigma quite yet. So I don't know, maybe 50-50.
Please hold for a moment. Your call is important to us, so we'll be with you as soon as possible.
Somebody put us on hold.
Ryan, I'm going to go into lecture mode.
Okay, great. Okay. Jen, does that answer your question? Just let me type in and say yes, and again, if you want me to be more specific or if there's something I didn't answer, please let me know.
While we're waiting for Jen to answer, I can just throw in my experience right now with the Multnomah County team.
Thank you.
Certainly my role as the prescribing staff, I haven't gone on a home visit or a community visit in about 3 years. Once we got up to our capacity, it's been tough for me to get out of the office given the travel time involved. But our other staff members, including our nurse, our occupational therapist, our employment specialist, and our mental health consultants, I would say are delivering probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of services in the community.
Thank you, Neil. There's one thing unique about our early psychosis programs, is that we do ask, and in kind of situations where it may be helpful or even necessary, do ask that our prescribers also kind of work in the community. And I know there are other ESA programs, or early psychosis programs around the state where prescribers are still going into the community especially to engage, particularly this kind of first episode group where the insight is lost and going to a clinic is not going to happen. Looking at Bill Bain's questions, and Tamara, can you respond to those? Seems like more of your area.
Sure, yeah. So the question is about specific outcomes resulting from coordinated specialty care or similar models, or the ESA program. There's been quite a bit of research about these types of programs at this point, and some that's still outstanding and not yet published from the RAISE study that we're really looking forward to. Some of the immediate outcomes that people see are reduction in the time that psychosis goes untreated, so reduced DUP or duration of untreated psychosis. Also, pretty universally, the programs all show a significant decline fairly rapidly in the symptoms of psychosis. But of course, the symptoms are not necessarily predictive of functioning, so that's less of our concern than some of the other indicators. Generally speaking, there are increases or improvements in vocational outcomes, both in terms of school and work involvement. And this is one where I think that developing longer-term supports for people is going to be really important. The outcomes that we're seeing in those areas vary considerably across programs, but generally there's always an increase. It's just a question of whether it's 60% or 80% at the end of 2 years who are involved in school or work. And probably the more dramatic thing that people point to is the reduction in hospitalization over time. All of these areas need additional research, and we're not totally satisfied with the studies that have been done out there. But the research that's been done so far indicates hospitalization rates or readmission rates of about about a 50% reduction within the first year. So that's actually something that is a pretty good selling point for these programs, because when we talk about early intervention or prevention, typically people are talking about a long-term investment, whereas with these folks, depending on your community, they tend to start off with hospitalization rates of 50 to 80%. And then, basically you're going down from there. So these are folks who are extremely high risk of readmission and of ending up in state hospital care. So that's kind of an important finding. There's a study that's about to come out from Yale, where they had received a contract with the state that didn't have quite enough funding to serve all of their privately insured individuals. So they randomized the privately insured folks to coordinated specialty care versus what they would ordinarily have received in the community. And they found some really remarkable outcomes that I think are going to really help us to document the cost benefit. Some of the other areas that are not quite as well researched, but I think are really consistent in our observations, are improved family involvement and coping. We sometimes kind of joke that our program is a divorce prevention program because the level of stress on these families is so tremendous. And then, of course, our biggest concern and kind of long-term goal is to support self-efficacy and engagement. So, again, that's one that hasn't been well measured, but just in terms of the relationship of the people who are in the program to the service provider system. Basically what we're trying to do is to have people come in to the system in a way that they feel good about where they want to actually access the resources that are available to them versus an involuntary and traumatizing entry that then makes them want to go away permanently. So there's lots of research that's been done, and I can certainly try to pull together some of that for you. Also, there's a movement towards a national integrated learning healthcare process that the folks at NIMH are spearheading, and that's really exciting. So there's a process going on right now of defining a common set of outcomes and then creating a national structure for sharing data and learning from our experiences. And so, as folks are starting new programs, it's really an amazing time to be starting off. I think we'll be learning from each other. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Neil, if you could type and let us know if that got to the meat of your question. Sounds like it did. Good. Thank you, Tamara, for
Sure.
managing that one. Other specific questions from the group? Another practical question, I love those, from Jen Walker, is how do you handle on-call? I'm thinking that you're referring to crisis situations or after hours. Is that what you're referring to, Jen? Okay. That's a great question, and really kind of depends on your individual settings. I think I mentioned in the webinar that, although the ACT model in and of itself asks for 24/7 availability, and most certainly early psychosis programs take elements of ACT, as do kind of ESA programs here in Oregon. I know some of our sites do have rotating on-call after-hours crisis workers, and those workers are ESA clinicians. So they would potentially handle the on-call situation. So again, much like I think what you're describing, there is a rotation. Jen, I see that generally happening in our smaller sites, our less populated areas in which on-call is rotated. What that also means is that particular clinician also potentially carries a non-early psychosis caseload part of the time. And so they're doing, and part of their job duties is just to be on call. The nice thing about that is if there is an early psychosis client in crisis, they know the person and they're able to handle that directly. The majority of the early psychosis sites in Oregon, or the ESA sites in Oregon, we encourage and support them and coach them in really working with their after-hours system to make sure that they have a very coordinated system in which that if any ESA clinician recognizes that one of the clients may be headed towards crisis, that the after-hour program, whether it's an in-house program governed by that particular community mental health center or one that they contract with. I know some sites contract with, Protocol and some of those national services. You make sure that there is a direct link for those services, that those services would be able to access any records, particularly crisis plans if one person was going into crisis. In terms of answering your question about how often do participants use the after-hour lines, I'm going to, again, anecdotally, I don't know if we have direct data on how often this actually occurs, but what I hear is not that often. That our clients use it. They tend to use it when they need it. And I know even some of our prescribers actually have publicly listed their cell phone numbers. And there was a big worry. It's like, oh, are your client's going to use that all the time now that now you have your cell phone number posted? And we found not really. And generally we found when clients did use that number, it was when they really did need it, and the clinicians were thankful they used it because we were able to maybe curb a hospitalization or maybe curb a really bad outcome. So that's my sense. Neil, I don't know if you have experience from Multnomah County being the largest group on how often people use after-hour lines or your crisis line.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me explain what we have set up. Multnomah County is lucky in that we have a county-run call center that works 24/7 to address crisis issues as well as just systems issues for people. And they're located actually down the hall from our administrative desks. So they sort of work as our after-hours answering service. During the day, all of our clinicians have cell phones on. If they're not available, they'll have a voicemail saying who to call in lieu of them because they're busy or on vacation, etc. And then after hours and weekends, the call center is available for our ESA staff. They have a dedicated ESA line, so they know if that line rings, it's going to be an ESA person. And I'd say, gosh, on average, it's not used often, maybe 2 to 3 times per month. And as Ryan said, they are used for appropriate purposes. People have run out of medication refills and don't know where to get them. People are having increased symptoms. And I'd say at least 70-80% of the time, the calls are resolved without having to use an ED or a hospital.
Let me just add that we are part of a national network of programs, some of which do have on-call within their programs. And so I'm going to take some of these questions and send them to the On Track New York, University of North Carolina, and UC San Francisco folks, and we'll forward you their answers as well.
Okay. Let's see, moving down the questions, don't want to lose them. Bill Bain asks, are peer specialists and or family peer specialists used in our program? The answer to that is yes. Peer specialists, anyways, are specifically being hired and used in our program. It's definitely emerging, and I think we're learning as we're moving along on best utilization of using peer specialists. Again, anecdotally, as I'm kind of hearing, it's been very helpful and useful. And one thing that I'm hearing specifically from programs is kind of the self-recognition, or when having a peer support specialist at the table, we're more cognizant and aware of how we use language, and that peer support specialists are kind of calling us as clinicians out at times. And so it's been helpful both from an external standpoint and engaging clients in the community, as well as helping us recognize how our own language is used and how we kind of talk in treatment team meetings. Okay.
And Neil, you also have quite a bit of experience now using peer support. Do you want to talk about that experience?
Yeah, I was actually stunned earlier this week. We had our graduation ceremony, our bi-yearly graduation ceremony, and we recognized that our peer specialist has been with us for 9 months. I didn't realize it was that long, and it's been fantastic. Our peer specialist is someone who's in, I'm guessing, I don't know for certain, her mid, maybe late 20s, so can identify with that population age-wise, and just is out there with her own story, and that really engenders a lot of trust. And she's able to get a lot of information from people as a peer that we as professionals just have never been able to get from folks. And she gets it in a way that people are comfortable that she can share it with the rest of the team. It's been an incredibly powerful experience. And I'd also second what Ryan said. We've become much more cognizant not only of our verbal language, but our written language and our notes and our forms, etc., based on what our peer specialist is bringing to the table. We don't have any family peer specialists in our program. I don't know if they're being used throughout the state, but I will mention that in our multifamily groups that we have, a lot of times family takes on that role in a way of family peer specialists. One of my favorite stories from a couple of years ago is we had a participant in our program who was in his early 20s who came to the multifamily group, but his mother, I can't remember, either refused to come or was unavailable due to work. On the flip side, we had a mother of a 20-year-old in the program, and that participant did not want to come to the multifamily group, but the mother did. And we had this unique situation in which the participant and the mother of the other participant could talk to each other about ideas of talking to their family member. So in that way, they function as a peer specialist and a family peer specialist for each other, and the results were magical. Basically along the lines, one would say, I'd like to tell my family member this, and the doppelganger, if you will, that was in the group would say, no, don't word it that way, that will shut it down or she'll never listen. You want to word it this way. And they were able to help each other immensely.
Yeah, I'm not aware. I don't think we have specific family peer specialists in programs in Oregon. However, I would echo absolutely what Dr. Falk just mentioned. The use of the multifamily groups, it tends to happen quite organically and naturally, and I know from my past experience in working with those groups that once families have left those groups, they've started their own groups and have supported families and meeting in coffee shops and really have created that social network, which is, I think, one of the more powerful outcomes of the use of multifamily psychoeducation groups in early psychosis programs.
Yeah, I will mention that we did submit a grant application earlier this year to start a family peer support program in the Portland metro area, and they asked us to come back next year. So hopefully in the next year or so we will get that capacity going.
And I'll also throw in there, some of our families are unable to make it, for example, to our multifamily groups, and they'll take advantage of resources like, I believe it's through NAMI. Is it called peer-to-peer or family-to-family? I can't remember which.
Family to family.
Yeah. So they'll take advantage of that as well, and that brings in a family peer specialist in a way as well. Just to be clear, we are not formally connected with NAMI. It's just something that people organically have done themselves.
Okay, then looks like the next question from Lauren. Does your program primarily use phone to communicate with clients about scheduling appointments or reminders? Do you ever use email and texting? I would say probably primarily we're still using phones. However, the texting is growing immensely, and I know we as a program worked very hard, particularly from the Center of Excellence, to really try to establish policies with each of our programs around the state that allowed the use of electronic communication, specifically that of texting and email. And I believe the majority now of our programs around the state have that ability, and that ability may be because they have to sign releases specific to texting or some specific language in email that reminds clients that this is not confidential and really kind of leaving it up to them. So really kind of changing that or really modifying our informed consent to let families and participants know if they want to use texting, if they want to use email, then that is an option for them. I can tell you from feedback that our families are quite appreciative that we do email. You said that seems to be a primary mode of communication for families. And I can tell you that our clients definitely appreciate that we text them because that's how they talk to each other and to us. So I've argued for a year or so that we need to allow texting because it's basically a cultural adaptation to the group that we're working with. And by allowing texting, we're engaging in culturally sensitive practice, given the age range and the current mode in which this particular group communicates. Yes. And I don't know if, Neil, you want to add to that. I know you're a group that uses texting and email and everything like that.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Our default is phone calls, and I think that's because we're the ones initiating the contact, and that's what we're comfortable with. But there definitely is a generational difference, and the clients definitely prefer texting. We don't use a lot of email, except for communication of small issues, non-urgent issues, and that generally is initiated by the clients. And I think we're moving more and more to texting. For example, at our graduation that I mentioned we had last week, we got rained out. We had some rain, surprise, surprise, here in Portland. Although we weren't expecting it, it's been a beautiful summer. So we made a lot of phone calls, got a lot of voicemail, not a lot of response, and then we sent out texts, and all of a sudden everyone started responding to us, oh, thanks for letting us know about the change in venue. So definitely texts are the way to go with this population, especially if it's I would say a time urgent issue, but not necessarily a clinically relevant urgent issue. Because texting, there just doesn't allow enough detail if there's some clinical urgency, but initiating, hey, I need to talk to you, happens all the time, and then that's followed up with a phone call. The one thing I'd also add, and I mentioned this in the last Q&A, you're going to need some pretty firm policies regarding electronic communication because they are not HIPAA compliant unless you're using encrypted email, which is relatively common, and encrypted texting, which exists but is very rarely used. And Tamara, I'm hoping that you were able to make available those forms I sent you last week that we use in Multnomah County for consents for texting and consents for email.
Yeah, we had sent those out to the participants last time, and then we'll also post them on our website.
Great, thank you.
Really great question, really important question, and I loved your little story there, Neil. It just kind of proves the point of
exactly.
You call everybody, no one responds, but you text, all of a sudden it floods in, and that's the culture of the group that we're working with. So we need to I think I'm encouraging programs to find those workarounds to allow for this mode of communication, which Multnomah has, our largest county and our largest program in Oregon, as well as I think almost every site is able to do it in some fashion or another.
The other thing I'd throw in there about texting, and I can't remember if I mentioned this at the last Q&A, is it's very easy to print an email and throw it in a chart to document it. It's not as easy with text, but it can be done. Be ready for that just in case you need it.
Okay, other questions from the participants on the line? Given that we have Dr. Falk on the line and we weren't able to get to some of the prescribing philosophies with early psychosis, would the group be interested in him spending a few minutes going over those slides? A simple type of a yes from a few people would answer my question, or no, and we can do other things. A sure, a yes. I actually didn't ask Neil about this, but but I'm good at putting people on the spot. So, Neil, would that be okay? I mean, it's like
part of community health is flexibility. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love that. So I'm going to switch to those slides real quick. Find those. And it's basically the slides that you sent, Neil. I modified them a little bit just to make them fit, but
Sure.
There you go. So I'm going to hand it over to Neil and let him do his lecture, and you can just flip through. Probably don't need to. I mean, we can use your video if you want, Neil, but you're live, so it's up to you.
And is it just this one slide, Ryan?
No, there's a few slides here.
This is
here.
the first one, though.
That's the first one of, it looks like four slides.
Okay.
Basically what you kind of sent.
Cool. So the basic philosophy, I would say, as far as prescribing that we try to follow, and again, this is coming out of the research that was done back in Australia and is still going on, minimize the use of medications as much as you can, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number one is we're trying to impress on the people we're working with that schizophrenia or psychosis is not an illness that needs medications. In fact, medications are going to work better if you have other tools that you can use as adjuncts to the medicine or use the medicine as an adjunct to that other tool. And when medicines are used, try to use low doses to minimize side effects for two reasons. Number one, well, maybe three reasons. Young adults and adolescents are more prone to these side effects. And I guess that leads into issue number two. Bad side effects are a great way to drive someone away from treatment. So you want to try to make it as gentle as possible so that you don't scare someone from trying medications again. And third issue would be just trying to partner with the person and not make it a negative experience, again, related to minimizing the side effects. So all that goes into that first point, the risk-benefit analysis. And I would add into there not only risk-benefit analysis done by the prescriber, but also negotiation done with the client. I see myself more as someone with expert knowledge that can tell someone good ideas, as opposed to a didactic person who is healing the person and telling them this is what you need to do. Part of that is just my personality. Part of it, I think, is also a way to have the client buy into treatment, so if something goes right, they feel good about their decision. If something goes wrong, you're not dismissed as a quack who doesn't know what you were talking about. You're sort of a joint team working together, and now you've got a problem solve. While I'm saying you should minimize meds should be used relatively quickly if you can. Again, if you remember back to the concept of duration of untreated psychosis, trying to minimize that as much as we can, because long story short, psychosis can be toxic to the brain according to some studies, so you want to get relief from that psychotic thought process as soon as you can. I've mentioned here, go slow, start low, sort of the geriatric mindset. Sort of, again, as far as minimizing side effects, but not because they're medically frail or physically frail as the geriatric population might be. Again, just to make it a more kindler, gentler experience. This, of course, has to be balanced against trying to get the psychosis under control as soon as possible. So while you're using low doses of medications, again, concentrate on sleep hygiene, make sure the person is sleeping well, eating well, exercising, having more to their life than just being someone who is psychotic taking medications. A great example of that is when people are feeling a bit more stable, one of our therapists usually does an exercise where she makes a pie chart and asks the person, okay, let's make a list next to the pie chart of what's going on in your life and what you identify with, and then let's put it in the pie chart according to percentages. And you can end up with someone seeing that their whole life is subsumed by psychosis and medications and the patient role. And other people, you can see, well, they're very involved in other areas of their life, and they'd like to expand those and minimize the patient function. And that's a good tool to start conversing about what can you do besides medication. Avoiding polypharmacy goes along the lines of keeping the meds as simple as possible. I get very frustrated when people come out of the hospital, let's say, and they're assigned to take a medication 3 or 4 times a day. Sometimes it's just that one medicine 3 or 4 times a day. And as we all know, the more often someone is told to take medication, the more frequent they're going to miss a dose here or there. So I try to go no more than twice a day dosing and try to keep the medicines, at least in the beginning, no more than 2 or 3, preferably 1. I just admitted someone to the program yesterday for an intake who's taking 20 milligrams of Zyprexa and 4 milligrams of Risperdal a day, and I have no clue why he's taking both medications. He's complaining of side effects and wants to quit the medication, so I'm basically on the hook now for a week to figure out what's going on from the hospital and try to make things agreeable to him. A great example of why polypharmacy just doesn't work. He's got too much meds. It's too complicated a regimen. We need to make it simpler for him. Let's see what's next. Integrating team members into the appointments. I would say 90-95% of my appointments are with the therapist or occupational therapist or peer specialist. Our nurse is with me 98% of the time. And a lot of that is great because we all have different approaches, different personalities. And sometimes when I'm flailing and not able to get what I need from the client or the information or to get a good idea of the symptoms, the therapists or the peer specialist especially are great at sort of bailing me out of that and helping to get a conversation going where we can get the conversation of medications started. It's also good as far as team communication goes because everyone is on the same page when you're hearing the same information at the same time. Appointments, I would say generally if someone's coming into the program and has acute symptoms or isn't fully stabilized, I can meet with them even once a week or once every other week. Once people start stabilizing monthly and then releasing to every 2 months or even every 3 months after maybe 6 or 8 months when the person is very stable. Certainly if they have other things going on in their life like work or school and I need to decrease my frequency, that's okay because I can rely on the therapist to gather information, and sometimes they'll even call me when I'm not at our office but they are working in the field with someone, and I can make medication changes over the phone because I trust the therapist, their eyes, their ears, and what they're telling me, plus they give me the opportunity to ask my questions to the client. So again, the team approach works really well, and sometimes you can back off on frequency for that reason. If people have questions while I'm going, by the way, please feel free to type them in. As far as more details, when someone is what used to be called prodromal, now called attenuated psychosis syndrome, we try to avoid medication use. There's not really good data to say who among the population having attenuated psychosis is going to develop a true psychotic disorder versus those where it's, say, a transient phase or due to an affective disorder that will flush out with time. So we try to minimize side effects, minimize any potential neurologic issues by introducing medications into the mix and try to use other supports. As it lists here, therapy, social support, multifamily group, OT, et cetera, et cetera. When someone's in this phase, it's a good time to start fish oil. If people are not familiar with the data behind fish oil, I am guessing 3 years ago there was a study done in Austria primarily looking at a small group. It was under 100 people who were having attenuated psychotic symptoms, and they gave half the group randomly assigned to fish oil plus vitamin D and the other half just regular treatment, and they found that there was a conversion rate decrease of 25% among the people who took fish oil. I don't know why this works. The best I can understand it is our brains are about 40% fat, and there's something about the omega-3 oils in fish oil that stabilizes the brain. There's some decent evidence as well that it helps out depression, it helps out anxiety, and the physical evidence for help from fish oil is very good too. It lowers triglycerides, it helps as far as skin, hair, maybe joint issues. It can't hurt to try. The only side effect is fish oil and fish burps and a little bit of a dent in the pocketbook. It costs somewhere between $20 and $30 a month, I'd say, depending where you buy it. And the recommendation out of the study I mentioned, which is referenced at the bottom of the slide, there's 3 oils in fish oil. They all go by 3-letter abbreviations. The important one, it seems, for brain function is abbreviated EPA, and you want 700 milligrams a day of EPA plus 1,000 units of vitamin D a day. That's what was used in the study. To be honest, there was some data that I think the state of Oregon looked into, or it might have been a national study. I can't remember. I saw some meta-analysis a couple months back. And looking at meta-analysis, the improvements are not as robust in mental health as originally thought when using fish oil. But again, if there's a chance it'll work, the side effects are minimal, I say go for it. And one other thing I'm leaving out, there's a controversy that came out this year. A couple groups have found that men who use fish oil are at increased risk for prostate cancer, but there's an equal amount of data that says that's not true. So that might be a future thing to discuss as far as side effects of fish oil. As far as once someone is stabilized and is in a maintenance treatment phase as far as medication goes, I always want to give people the chance to get off of medication or minimize the dose if possible. I fall back on the statistics that if you have, let's say, schizophreniform disorder, which again is indistinguishable from schizophrenia in the first episode, 75% of those people will never have a psychotic episode again, so why should we consign them to lifelong medications? There's not a lot of great data as far as how to take people off medication. The best I've found is go slow when you're decreasing medicine, and slow in the literature is defined as taking at least 2 weeks or more. Anecdotally, my experience, depending on how high the dose is when you're starting, somewhere between 1 and 4 months is what I practice. And I also tell people that when you get off medication, that creates a vacuum, so you need to replace the medication with something else. And be that more individual therapy, be that more exercise, be that more multifamily group, whatever, you need to put something in the place of medications. And as the last point under that says, remember, we're not treating so much to eradicate symptoms, it's more about getting the person functional. I prefer getting people asymptomatic if possible because that decreases the risk for future symptoms. But again, in the moment, look at function, try to establish function. You can always chase symptoms down later. And that's pointed out, I think, in this quote, which I won't read to you from an ESA participant. I assume everyone can read them themselves. The final points, what I call the selection bias of clinic patients. A friend of mine who has schizophrenia pointed out to me a couple years ago that people will develop psychotic symptoms, be diagnosed with schizophrenia, recover, have no more symptoms, and then they don't come in for treatment anymore. We as providers tend to forget those people are out there. We only see the selection bias that comes in to see us of people who remain symptomatic, so we come up in our minds with a untruth that schizophrenia is an illness of chronic psychotic symptoms. when in fact it doesn't happen. And once you sort of can accept that, it frees you up to try minimizing or even discontinuing medications. I see two questions have come in. Well, one was just on the presenter chat. I presume, Tamara, you were asking when I said Austria about the study with fish oil, and you questioned should it be Australia? And no, that actually was in Europe. It was Austria. And the second question here says, about antipsychotic prescribing for active psychosis, the recommended approach is start low, start slow, start ASAP. Did I understand that correctly? Yes. I thought there was a controversy about how toxic psychosis is to the brain. Is there ever a reason to delay antipsychotic initiation? And that's sort of the tightrope that I was talking about. You want to go low, go slow, but you want to get the psychosis under control as soon as possible. What I have found experientially is if someone has just psychosis, not mania, if you start low, assuming the client wants to take medication, they will very quickly say the medication's not working, can we try more, as long as the side effects aren't intolerable. So I think there's sort of built into that once you start medications, you can ramp them up pretty quickly and get that toxic effect of psychosis under control relatively quick. If you go the opposite direction and say, let's knock this out really quickly, you risk the person having side effects, saying, I don't like this medicine, I don't want to try any other medication, and then it's hard to get the psychosis under control in the long run and get rid of that toxic effect. So I think it's worth starting slow because you have a better chance over the weeks of getting it under control quickly and for a long period. The two exceptions to that rule, one would be someone who is potentially dangerous. Absolutely, then I would go against the usual ESA dictum and start at a higher dose and risk the side effects. And number two, if someone has manic symptoms, my experience, despite the ESA training, is if someone's manic and you start low and you go slow, you're never catching up with the illness. You want to start heavy and back off. But those would be the exceptions to the rule. And I hope that answers the questions. If not, please type more in or ask for more clarification. And Ryan, I think you said there was one more slide here. Yes. Development of symptoms. I'm looking through this to see what the slide addresses. I guess this is sort of restating what I've already stated on the prior slides. Medication should be thought of not as the tool to use for psychosis, but one of the many in the palette or one of many in the toolbox that you can use. And one of our therapists has described us as a one-stop shopping place. We offer just about everything, such as the services listed on this slide. Just because we offer them all doesn't mean that the client needs to take advantage of all of them right away. So we start off with what would you like? Let's see if those works. And let's say someone decides not to try medication up front, which I'd say happens about 10-20% of the time. The other people will work with the client, and if symptoms don't resolve, then they'll say, well, we tried this, should we try medications? After a couple weeks or a month, the answer usually is yes. And some people want to start with fish oil or more natural remedies, and then will eventually progress to medications if the fish oil isn't cutting the mustard, so to speak. Nope, I think that was it for the slides. One thing I forgot to mention very quickly, I've run into a couple people here who are vegan and don't want to take fish oil. There's also flaxseed oil, which also contains the omega-3 fatty acids, also contains EPA. So you can use those in lieu of fish oil. The problem with flaxseed oil is it's more expensive, so that's why I usually start with fish oil. There's also some studies that say flaxseed oil is not as effective as fish oil, and then there are some studies that say flaxseed is more effective than fish oil. So I think the jury is out on that for the time being. Tamara has asked a question in our presenter window. Did people cover metabolic disorder and the importance of lab testing during webinar number 2, I believe, Tamara, you mean?
Right.
And Ryan, it looks like you didn't, so certainly I can mention that. Well, before I talk about it, are people familiar with metabolic risks and metabolic syndrome associated with antipsychotic medication? You can just type in your answer, yes, no. If there's a lot of no's, then I can explain it in a bit more detail. get one yes. And it looks like a second answer coming in, maybe. A couple answers coming in. Okay, it's looking like the general consensus is going to be yes, so I'll just, pardon me, say what we do about it and why it's important. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, young adults and late adolescents are more prone to the side effects of antipsychotics, especially the metabolic ones. And what I found in experiences when people gain weight, for example, with antipsychotic medication, you can lose the weight if you stop the medication, but generally speaking, people who don't exercise don't lose the weight. And this is not an age group that exercises regularly for the most part. So the best, treatment is prevention, so try to avoid the metabolic problems to begin with is number one. So the two ways I know of to do that are using medications with less risk. Generally speaking, that appears to be medications like aripiprazole, ziprasidone, maybe some of the newer ones like lorazepam or asenapine. We're unfortunately in a situation right now where the 3 generic atypical antipsychotics all have at least moderate, if not heavy, metabolic risk. So again, you have to balance finances with metabolic risk. We tend to watch it closely. Anyone who comes in to see me, I'd say 90% of the time we have an appointment, I check in, how are you exercising? What are you doing? What diet are you following? We might want to follow up with what foods are you eating? And I try to remind people exercise doesn't have to be intense. Walking is great exercise, and if you can get 20 to 30 minutes of walking in a day, that can do a pretty good job of mitigating metabolic syndrome. Another big thing we talk about are energy drinks and sodas, which contain huge amounts of calories. So if someone's at risk for metabolic syndrome, cutting back to diet drinks often helps, preferably if they're caffeinated, cutting them out. When the therapists go out in the field to meet with people, oftentimes they'll try to do something involving some physical activity, either walking while talking or maybe walking to a coffee shop instead of driving to a coffee shop so the person gets some physical activity. Lab testing, we test yearly pretty much. The general consensus is to get blood sugars yearly and cholesterol every couple years, but we still check cholesterol yearly. If we have someone who comes to us starting meds, which often happens, we'll usually recheck those levels 3 to 6 months after they've been on the medication. And try to be pretty quick about switching medications if someone is developing metabolic syndrome or gaining a lot of weight. One thing to remember, generally speaking, people who come into an early psychosis program are taking their first antipsychotic medication. And most people are pan-responsive to antipsychotics. It doesn't matter which one you use, they're probably going to respond. So if someone is starting to develop metabolic issues, I'm pretty quick to switch medications. I've run into, I'd say, 4 to 6 people over 5 years who turn out to be responsive to only one medication and have metabolic problems or some other side effects. But I take a good year trying multiple other options before saying you're just going to have to put up with this. I think that's the best I'm going to come up with off the top of my head. I don't know, Tamara or Ryan, if you would have anything to add or if people have other questions about it.
No, I just think that, the awareness of the importance of obtaining labs is also important. We have a lot of people with prediabetes and, early metabolic disorder even before they start taking medicine. So, we think about this age group as being really healthy, and I think in reality sometimes they're not quite as healthy as we would expect them to be.
And you're reminding me when you said that if I get the option of starting a medication, I try to screen very carefully to see if someone does have risk factors for diabetes as an individual. And if someone has family risk factors, if there's more than 2 or 3 people in the family with metabolic issues, strokes, heart attacks, or diabetes, I'm very wary of using a high-risk medication. And then people of color, I would also consider that a risk factor for developing diabetes as just, what's the word I'm looking for, not actuarially, but just, the risk pool, the risk factors as far as people of color developing diabetes is higher than for Caucasians. So I'm very wary of trying to use something, for example, like olanzapine if someone comes in who's African American, Native American, Asian.
Thanks, Neil. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you were able to give some personal some stories and just kind of add more detail than I would have added on the previous webinar. So thank you for spending the time. Other questions specific to Neil or from the clinical aspects of early psychosis programs? I was flipping through the slides too. I got a note from a camera about reminding you about the call on the 30th, and I was trying to pull up to see if I had some specific details on that. Tamara, do you have the specific details on call number 3?
So it is on September 30th, and everyone should receive an announcement about it if you haven't already. The registration is at the same location as for this call. But you will be receiving a follow-up email with the link to register. And that call will include Lisa Dixon from On Track New York and Raise Connections, as well as Nev Jones. And the focus of it will be on how to set up a program. So we hope to see everybody, or talk to everybody then.
There, that's what I was looking for. That's a good reply. At the beginning. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll type in my email. Again, if people have specific clinical questions, you can email me, and I will be happy to respond. Also, please follow us on Facebook. A lot of really great information there. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.